Before you watch this video, please answer this question with a simple yes or no. If you had the opportunity to travel abroad first, would you bring your partner with you? Traveling abroad and bringing your loved ones to join you is often seen as the pinnacle of success, especially in places like Ghana, where the opportunity to live and work in a foreign country is considered a gateway to a better life. For many families, the dream of reuniting abroad seems like the perfect path to happiness, a chance to provide for those you care about and to build a future together in a land of promise. However, as many have learned the hard way, this dream can sometimes turn into a nightmare. The reality is that moving to a new country can strain relationships, change people, and lead to unexpected consequences that can tear families apart. This is a story of one such family, a story so emotional and heartbreaking that it will make you think twice before deciding to bring your loved ones abroad, whether it be for better or for worse. In Ghana, it's not uncommon to hear of families that fall apart after the husband or father sends for his wife and children to join him overseas. The new environment, the freedom, and the cultural differences often lead to changes in behavior and attitudes that can have devastating effects. This story is a stark reminder of how the dream of a better life can sometimes turn into a curse, unraveling the very bonds of love and trust that once held a family together. Anane was a devoted teacher living in a small, quiet town in Ghana. Every day he poured his heart into his work and returned home to care for his aging mother. She was his world, and he did everything he could to make her comfortable, despite the financial challenges they faced. "I wish I could do more for you, Ma," Anane would often say, sitting by her side after a long day at school. She would smile gently and pat his hand. "You're doing your best, my son. That's all that matters." But deep down, Anane felt the burden of his small monthly salary. It barely covered their basic needs, and the thought of providing more, a better home, healthier meals, the medical care his mother needed, kept him awake at night. His dreams of a better life often took him to distant lands, far beyond the horizon, where he believed he could find the financial relief he so desperately sought. "Maybe one day I'll travel abroad and make a better life for us," he would whisper to himself in the quiet of the night, hope battling with uncertainty in his heart. One day, as he walked through the town market, Anane's life changed in a way he hadn't expected. He met Araba, a strong, resilient woman who was raising her young daughter, Essie, all on her own. Araba's eyes held a quiet strength, and her smile, though weary, was full of warmth. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Anane greeted her politely. They struck up a conversation, talking about life, work, and the challenges of raising a child alone. Anane found himself captivated by Araba's grace and determination. "She's incredible," he thought, watching her interact with Essie, a lively little girl with a spark of mischief in her eyes. As weeks turned into months, Anane found himself spending more and more time with Araba and Essie. The three of them would often take walks together, with Essie running ahead, laughing and playing. Anane couldn't help but smile as he watched them. Essie reminded him of the simple joys of his own childhood, now distant memories buried under the weight of adult responsibilities. One evening, as they sat by a small fire outside Araba's house, Anane felt a deep sense of contentment wash over him. "Araba," he began hesitantly, "I've grown to care for you and Essie a great deal. I want to be a part of your lives, if you'll have me." His voice trembled slightly, the vulnerability of the moment overwhelming him. Araba looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. She saw the depth of his affection, not just for her, but for her daughter as well. "Are you sure, Anane?" she asked softly. "It's not an easy life. And with your salary?" Her voice trailed off, worry etched across her features. Anane reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know it won't be easy," he replied, his voice steady. "But I want to try. I want to be there for you both." After careful thought, Araba accepted his proposal. Their wedding was a simple, intimate affair, surrounded by a few close friends and family. Despite the challenges ahead, the day was filled with hope and love. Anane embraced his new role as Essie's father with all the love and devotion he could muster. Every day, he worked hard to provide for his little family, finding joy in the small moments, helping Essie with her homework, sharing meals together, and simply being there for them. However, life had one more surprise in store for Anane. Before he met Araba, he had applied for the American lottery, hoping to win a chance to work abroad. It had been a distant dream, one he'd nearly forgotten in the happiness of his new life. But just a few months after their wedding, Anane received the news he had won the lottery. It was a moment of disbelief and joy, yet also of deep sorrow. "Araba," he said quietly, holding the letter in his hands. "I've won, but it means I'll have to leave." Tears filled Araba's eyes as the reality of the situation set in. "What will we do without you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Anane pulled her close, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'll work hard. I promise. I'll do everything I can to bring you and Essie to join me. This isn't just for me. It's for us, for our future." The day of Anane's departure was filled with tearful goodbyes and promises of a brighter future. He held Araba and Essie tightly, vowing to come back for them as soon as possible. As he boarded the plane, his heart was heavy, but his resolve was firm. The dream of a better life was now within reach, and Anane was determined to make it a reality for the family he loved so dearly. Despite being thousands of miles away in America, Anane never let the distance weaken his bond with his beautiful wife, Araba, and his lovely stepdaughter, Essie. Every month, he faithfully sent money back home, ensuring that Essie's school fees were paid on time and that Araba and Essie were well taken care of. He wanted them to lack nothing, and his love for them only grew stronger with each passing day. Whenever he called, Anane would reassure Araba, "I haven't forgotten my promise. One day, you and Essie will join me here in America, and we'll build a better life together." Araba, her voice filled with emotion, would respond, "I trust you, Anane. We're patiently waiting for that day. Essie and I are proud of everything you're doing for us." Years went by, and while life in America was challenging for Anane, he never wavered in his commitment to his family. He worked long hours, often late into the night, driven by the dream of bringing his wife and stepdaughter to live with him. He knew how difficult it was for Araba back home, especially with the constant gossip and the unkind words from those in the town. "Why don't you just move on, Araba?" one of the women from the market would say, a smirk playing on her lips. "Anane's probably forgotten all about you and Essie. He's living his life in America, and you're here, waiting for nothing." But Araba would simply smile, her faith in Anane unshakable. "He's my husband, and I believe in him," she would reply calmly. "He hasn't forgotten us, and he never will." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their small home, the phone rang. Araba picked it up, her heart skipping a beat, when she heard Anane's voice on the other end. "Araba," he began, his voice trembling with excitement. It's time. Time for what, Anane? Araba asked, her heart racing with anticipation. It's time for you and Essie to come to America, Anane said, barely able to contain his joy. I've made all the arrangements. The visas are ready, the tickets are booked, and soon we'll be together again. Tears welled up in Araba's eyes as she clutched the phone, her voice breaking. Oh, Anane, is it really true? After all these years? Yes, my love, Anane reassured her. It's really happening. No more waiting, no more doubts. We're going to be a family here, just like we always dreamed. Essie, who had been listening nearby, ran to her mother's side. Mama, what's happening? Why are you crying? With a smile that shone through her tears, Araba pulled Essie close. We're going to America, my darling. We're going to be with your father. The next few months were filled with preparations. Araba and Essie said their goodbyes to friends and family, some of whom still doubted Anane's intentions. He'll send for you, but will he really be the same man you knew? They would ask. But Araba's heart was steadfast. He's the same man, and he's been working hard for us all this time. Finally, the day came. As they boarded the plane, Araba held Essie's hand tightly. The journey was long, but their hearts were light, filled with the promise of reunion. When they arrived at the airport in America, they scanned the crowd anxiously, searching for a familiar face. Then they saw him, Anane, standing tall, a wide smile spreading across his face, his eyes glistening with tears of happiness. Papa! Essie shouted, breaking into a run. Anane knelt down, his arms wide open, catching Essie as she flung herself into his embrace. My little girl, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. You've grown so much. Araba approached slowly, her eyes never leaving Anane's. He stood up, taking her hands in his, and for a moment they just looked at each other, overwhelmed by the reality of finally being together. I told you I'd bring you here, Anane said softly, pulling her into a tight embrace. I never forgot, not for a single day. Araba rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I knew you wouldn't. I always believed in you. Together they left the airport, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. The journey had been long and difficult, but their love had endured, stronger than ever. As they stepped into their new life in America, they knew that they were no longer just surviving. They were finally living their dream as a family, united once more. As time went on, Anane, Araba, and Essie continued to build their lives in America. Anane worked tirelessly to provide for his family, and his love for Araba and Essie was unwavering. He cherished every moment with them, and to anyone looking in from the outside, it was impossible to tell that Essie wasn't his biological daughter. He treated her with such affection and care that she had become the center of his world. Essie, who was just 15 years old when they arrived in America, was given opportunities that she had only dreamed of back in Ghana. She excelled in school and seemed to be thriving in her new environment. Anane and Araba were proud of her accomplishments, and they did everything they could to support her education. It was a dream come true for all of them, especially from Anane, who took great pride in seeing his family flourish. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, there was a deep sadness that weighed on Anane and Araba. Despite their love for each other, they had been unable to have a child of their own. They had tried everything, doctors, treatments, and prayers, but nothing seemed to work. Each passing year brought with it the quiet grief of unfulfilled dreams. Anane consoled himself with the thought that he still had Essie, who had become like a daughter to him. but the pain of not having a child of his own was something he carried in silence. As Essie grew older and reached the age of 18, the dynamics within the household began to change. The once obedient and respectful Essie started to misbehave. She became more rebellious, ignoring Anane's advice and defying his authority. Whenever Anane tried to guide her, she would lash out, her words sharp and cutting. "You are not my real father," she would shout in anger. "You don't have the right to tell me what to do." These words cut Anane deeply, but he never showed it. He would walk away, his heart heavy with disappointment and hurt. He couldn't understand why Essie had changed so much, why she no longer respected him or valued the love and care he had always shown her. Araba, who had always been a loving and supportive wife, found herself torn between her husband and her daughter. She saw the pain in Anane's eyes every time Essie insulted him, and it broke her heart. She knew that Essie was taking advantage of the freedoms that life in America offered, especially the laws that favored children and protected them from harsh discipline. Araba was afraid to scold or punish Essie, fearing that it might push her further away or lead to even greater conflict in their home. One evening, after another heated argument between Essie and Anane, Araba called her daughter into her room. "Essie, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but firm. Essie rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defiantly. "What is it, Mom?" Araba took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Essie, do you remember where we came from? Do you remember the struggles we faced back in Ghana? Your father, Anane, brought us here to give us a better life. He has sacrificed so much for us. For you." Essie shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. "I know that things are different here," Araba continued. "I know that the laws are not the same as back home, and you have more freedom, but that doesn't mean you should forget who you are or where you come from. Anane may not be your biological father, but he loves you as if you were his own. Everything he does, every piece of advice he gives, it's because he wants the best for you. You may not see it now, but one day you'll realize how much he's done for you." Essie sighed, looking away. "He just doesn't understand me, Mum. He's always telling me what to do." Araba reached out, gently turning Essie's face to look at her. "He understands more than you think. He's trying to protect you, to guide you. Please, Essie, don't let this freedom make you forget the values we taught you. Respect your father. Listen to him. He deserves that much." For a moment, Essie looked as though she might listen, but then she pulled away, her expression hardening again. "I'll think about it, Mom," she muttered before walking out of the room. Araba watched her go, a deep sense of worry settling in her heart. She knew that Essie was at a crossroads, and she prayed that her daughter would choose the right path. Meanwhile, Anane sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. He wondered where things had gone wrong and whether his dream of a happy family was slipping away. The days that followed were tense. Essie continued to challenge Anane's authority, and though Araba tried to mediate, the distance between them all grew wider. Anane felt increasingly isolated, struggling with the realization that no matter how much love he gave, it might not be enough to hold his family together. The love that once bound them so tightly was now being tested, and Anane could only hope that they would find a way through this storm together. As Essie turned 19, her behavior took a more troubling turn. She began bringing different men home, introducing them as her boyfriends, much to Anane's dismay. The house that had once been a sanctuary of love and family values was now filled with tension and strife. Anane, deeply disturbed by Essie's actions, tried repeatedly to talk sense into her. "Essie, this isn't right," Anane, who would say, his voice tinged with frustration and worry. "You can't just bring different men into our home like this. It's not safe, and it's not respectful." But Essie, emboldened by the freedom she had grown accustomed to in America, would meet his concerns with defiance. "This is my life, and I'll do what I want," she would retort, her eyes flashing with anger. "If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine." The arguments grew more frequent and more heated. Anane found himself increasingly at odds with Essie, who seemed determined to challenge his every word. Each confrontation left him more drained, more heartbroken. He had never imagined that the daughter he had loved and cared for would turn against him in such a hurtful way. Araba, caught in the middle, was torn between her love for her daughter and her loyalty to her husband. She tried to reason with Essie, but the young woman's rebellious streak seemed unstoppable. Araba's heart ached as she watched the man she loved and the daughter she cherished locked in a battle that seemed to have no end. One fateful day, while Araba was at work, she received a call that would change everything. Essie was on the other end, her voice frantic and filled with tears. "Mom, you have to help me," Essie cried, her voice shaking. Dad tried to rape me. I can't take it anymore, so I called the police." Araba felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. "What are you saying, Essie?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her mind struggling to process the horrifying accusation. "It's true, Mom," Essie insisted, her sobs echoing through the phone. "He's been trying to do this for a while, but today I had to do something. I called the police, Mom. They're taking him away." Without a second thought, Araba rushed home, her mind a whirlwind of fear, disbelief, and confusion. How could this be happening? How could the man she loved, the man who had raised Essie as his own, be capable of such a thing? But deep down, a voice whispered that something wasn't right. She couldn't believe Anane would ever do such a thing. When Araba arrived home, she found that the police had already taken Anane to the station. She hurried there, her heart pounding in her chest. The scene that greeted her at the station was almost too much to bear. Anane was sitting in a small, dimly lit room, his face streaked with tears, his hands trembling as he tried to explain himself to the officers. "I don't know why she's saying this," Anane said, his voice breaking. I would never harm Essie. She's my daughter. I love her like my own. Please, you have to believe me. I'm innocent." But Essie was adamant, her accusations sharp and unwavering. She presented her evidence to the police, her voice steady and filled with conviction. Araba watched in silence, her heart shattering as she listened to the girl she'd raised accuse the man she had loved for so many years. Anane, seeing the doubt and pain in Araba's eyes, reached out to her, his voice pleading. "Araba, you know me. You know I would never do this. I swear to you, I am innocent." Araba didn't know what to think. She was trapped between the man she had trusted all her life and the daughter who was crying out for help. The love she had for both of them pulled her in two different directions, and she felt as though she was being torn apart. The police decided to launch a full investigation into the matter. They took Essie's statement and began examining the so-called evidence she had provided. Araba, in the meantime, was left to grapple with the unimaginable situation she found herself in. She couldn't believe that her life, once so full of love and promise, had come to this dark and terrifying place. The evidence that sealed Anane's fate was a series of WhatsApp conversations between him and his stepdaughter, Essie, found on Essie's phone. The messages appeared incriminating. They suggested that Anane had crossed an unforgivable line. In one message, Anane supposedly wrote, "Essie, you know I love you more than your mother. She's ugly, and I don't love her. Please accept me and I'll give you $10,000. Essie's response, which seemed to resist his advances, read, "No, Daddy. How can you do this with your own daughter?" To this, Anane allegedly replied, "Essie, you know you're not my blood daughter. That's why I get angry when you bring men to this house. It makes me just sour." Another message sent chills down the spine of anyone who read it. "You're too sweet, Essie. We had a very beautiful night." These conversations, as recorded on Essie's phone, painted a damning picture of Anane as a man who was deeply inappropriate and manipulative. The fact that these messages were found only on Essie's phone added to the suspicion that Anane was deliberately covering his tracks by deleting his side of the conversation, leaving Essie's records as the only proof of what had transpired. Despite the gravity of the evidence against him, Anane maintained his innocence, insisting that nothing improper had ever occurred between him and his stepdaughter. He claimed that the messages were fabricated, that they did not reflect reality. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Essie's story was convincing. Araba, torn between her love for her husband and the horrifying accusations from her daughter, ultimately believed Essie. "So this is what you've been doing to my daughter all this time?" Araba accused Anane, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "Is this why you were always so harsh with her?" Anane, devastated by the accusation, pleaded, "Araba, I swear, I don't know anything about these messages. I've never done anything to harm Essie. I'm innocent." But with no evidence to prove his innocence, and with Araba testifying against him in court, Anane was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The once loving husband and father was now a convicted criminal, abandoned by the very people he had dedicated his life to protecting. Throughout his time in prison, Anane remained resolute in his claims of innocence, but his words fell on deaf ears. Neither Araba nor Essie visited him, leaving him completely isolated and heartbroken. The story of his alleged crimes spread throughout the Ghanaian community in Michigan, and he was shunned by everyone who once knew him. After serving his sentence, Anane was released, but was immediately deported back to Ghana. His return was not the homecoming he had hoped for. His story had already reached his friends and family in Ghana, and instead of welcoming him back, they mocked and rejected him. Araba, who had remarried while he was still in prison, made no attempt to contact him or check on his well-being. The emotional toll of the false accusations, the betrayal by his wife and stepdaughter, and the rejection by his community became too much for Anane to bear. He soon suffered a stroke, leaving him incapacitated and without anyone to care for him. His health rapidly declined, and with no money to afford proper medical care, Anane passed away, a broken and lonely man. 3 years after his death, Araba was living alone when she heard a knock on the door. To her surprise, it was Essie's ex-boyfriend standing there. She welcomed him in, confused by his unexpected visit. The young man seemed troubled, and after a moment, he began to speak. "Mame, I need to confess something. I can't carry this burden any longer. Essie and I did something terrible, and I need your forgiveness." Araba's heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky. He took a deep breath and started. "Before your husband was jailed, I used to visit this house often. Mr. Anane was always angry at me and Essie, especially when I came around. Essie would get furious and insult him every time I was here. One day, she told me that her stepfather was the only problem in the house and that she wished he were dead. I told her that killing him wasn't an option, but she said he wasn't her real father, just a stepfather, and that he was good for nothing. Araba listened, her blood running cold. The young man continued, Essie told me she knew her stepfather's phone password because he sometimes asked her to help with settings. We came up with a plan. Essie would use his phone to send those messages to herself, making it look like they had been having an affair. After sending the messages, she would delete them from his phone, leaving only the incriminating evidence on her device. It took her more than a month to set everything up, but once it was all in place, she reported it to the police, and Mr. Anane was arrested. Mame, Mr. Anane was innocent all along. Araba was overwhelmed by the revelation. Everything she had believed, every action she had taken, was based on a lie. The enormity of her mistake, betraying her husband and sending him to his grave without a chance for redemption, crushed her spirit. The truth had come out, but far too late to make amends for the devastating consequences of the lies. Araba was at a complete loss. The revelation that her daughter, Essie, had fabricated the entire story that led to her husband's downfall left her in a state of shock and overwhelming guilt. She didn't know where to turn or what to do. The weight of her regret was suffocating. How could she face Anane's family and tell them that everything they believed about him was a lie? How could she possibly explain that the man they had condemned, rejected, and forgotten was innocent all along? But even more terrifying was the thought of implicating her own daughter, who had already spiraled out of control. Essie had become unrecognizable. What had started as rebellion had evolved into a full-blown descent into darkness. She was now a drug addict, her life unraveling as the consequences of her actions caught up with her. When Araba confronted her about the truth, Essie didn't deny it. Instead, she responded with cold indifference, showing no regret for the pain she had caused. The daughter Araba once knew had become a stranger, lost in her own world of self-destruction. Araba's heart was heavy with the burden of this terrible truth, and she was too paralyzed by guilt and shame to take any action. The regret of not believing her husband, of turning her back on him when he needed her most, consumed her. She wished she could turn back time, to undo the wrongs she had committed, to apologize to Anane, to show him that she still loved him despite the lies. But it was too late. Anane was gone, his life cut short by a lie that had destroyed him. Unable to bear the pain alone, Araba confided in her best friend. She poured out her heart, sharing the revelation and the unbearable guilt she carried. But even then, she felt trapped. What could she do now? Essie showed no signs of remorse, and the damage had already been done. Araba was left to live with the knowledge that her husband's death was a result of her own failure to see the truth. This is a true story, and sometimes life doesn't provide the closure we seek. For Araba, the story ends here, with a burden that she will carry to her grave. The Bible warns us in 2 Timothy 3:1-5 of the godlessness that will prevail in the last days. But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people. May the good Lord deliver us from families that repay our kindness with evil. May He protect us from ungrateful family members and shield us from our own children turning against us. May He bless us with loving children, children who listen to our advice and respect the love we give them. If you believe in this prayer, say Amen. Please share where you are watching this story from, and if you were touched by this story, subscribe to Anane Web of Tales. Stay blessed, and may you always be protected against evil within your own family. Say Amen.